Welcome to Resilience and Resolve with Lance Drury.
This is Resilience and Resolve. I'm Evan Mack with Lance Drury. Today we're tackling the offer in compromise, often marketed as a way to settle your IRS debt for pennies on the dollar. Is it real and does it actually work? Lance Drury, sir, can you tell the people at home about this offer in compromise? But first and foremost, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, Evan. What about yourself?
Oh, listen, I'm hanging in there. I want to get all this information, some things I don't know about, some things that people probably don't know about. But can you break down what an offer in compromise is and who actually qualifies for it?
Sure. An offer in compromise is where you offer to pay off some of the debt in exchange for the balance of the tax liability to be forgiven. It's a very formulaic process with the IRS, so you can tell your clients up front after you've done the financial analysis, okay, you qualify for an offer, but this is what you're going to have to pay to get the offer accepted. It's basically based upon your net equity and assets and your income minus your expenses. However, there's two caveats to that. We are finding, I just got off the phone with somebody in Nashville, Tennessee. They're going to owe about $300,000. So we went through the OIC analysis, the offer and compromise analysis. Well, prices are going through the roof in the Nashville area because people are moving in from California paying $200,000 more than the listed price. So we asked them, what's the fair market value of your home? $1.2 million. They probably still owe about $350,000, but that's going to knock them out of an offer in compromise. So offers in compromise are great if you don't have a lot of net equity and assets, and if you don't make a whole lot of money, and you're also relegated to the national standards, which you're not if you're just trying to get an installment agreement and you don't have a revenue officer on the case. The national standards, for those of you who don't know, is that for different categories of expenses, such as housing and utilities, the IRS will create a number saying this is all you're allowed. So 90% of my clients exceed the national standard for housing and utilities because they're so arbitrarily low. And in those cases where you're in the automated collection system, if you can prove that your expenses exceed that, they will grant you your actual expenses unless they're outrageous. If you owe them all this money and you got a $5,000 a month mortgage, it might be a problem getting the complete $5,000 mortgage accepted by the IRS as an allowable expense. So it's great for people that don't have a lot of equity and assets, don't make a lot of money, but obviously if you make $500,000 a year, you're not going to be a candidate for an offer. If you have all kinds of money in an IRA or a retirement, you're not going to qualify, or if you have a lot of equity in your home. So a lot more people qualify for an offer in compromise in the state of Missouri than do in Tennessee. And we're finding that some people around the San Antonio area, it's sort of in the middle. Less qualify than in Missouri, but more qualify than in Tennessee.
So how do they calculate if someone's eligible for that reduced settlement? They kind of make up a number, or like what do they do? What's the calculation for that?
It's very formulaic. There's a complete form to fill out, and we'll do that as part of our investigation and analysis of the case. And what happens is that first you go and you look at like the net equity and assets. So for the home, let's say it's $1 million home. That house, for purposes of the offer and compromise, is going to be valued at $800,000, and then you take away the mortgage. So let's say it's $350,000. So that means at a minimum you have to offer them $450,000. Well, now you haven't even considered the other assets. They're going to consider the equity in your vehicles. I believe the IRAs are 70 to 80% of the retirement. Stocks are about 80%. So if you've got a lot of money saved up, you're not going to be a good candidate for an offer.
Okay. So what financial documentation is required to even apply for this offer in compromise?
Well, the IRS there's a 433A, and there's also a 433F. Those are different financial forms for individuals. The 433A has a separate form for an offer in compromise. They require more information than on the normal 433A form. The 433A is used by revenue officers, by settlement officers, but there's a specific form for the offer in compromise. You've got to submit a lot more financial information. If they're going to ask you, do you anticipate your income is going to increase? You're going to receive an inheritance, because that could knock you out of the offer. But you've got to answer those questions honestly, or you're going to be guilty of fraud on the federal government. So, those are the types of things. And then you have to submit a separate form as to how you want to pay it. You can pay it over 12 months or you can pay it over 24 months. Normally, you want to pay it for the lesser, because then the lesser amount of time, so the total fee will be less that way.
So what happens? So what happens if the IRS rejects your offer? You know what I mean? Can you appeal it? Can it be revised? Because
you can appeal it, certainly, but once the appeal is done, then you got to go back to the automated collection system and try to get an installment.
Okay, so even
just
after,
just because it's rejected doesn't mean the game's over. That's the beauty of dealing with the IRS. You can go through all these hoops and get rejected, but you can still get a resolution.
So you can still get a resolution, even so you shouldn't get disheartened if this first offer in compromise form gets rejected and you appeal. You should not think this is the end of the situation.
Right, but a lot of people get upset because they've got their heart set on an offer. Because the beauty about the offer is, once you fulfill the terms of the offer in compromise, the liability goes away. You're done. Now, there is one caveat. You have to be compliant for the next 5 years. If you don't file on time and pay your taxes on time, guess what happens to the offer? It goes down the drain and all that liability comes back. So here's one of the things that we have to consider when somebody says that they want an offer in compromise, and that is, what is their history of compliance? Because if they have not filed on time and paid for a number of years, what's the likelihood that that's going to happen again? It's pretty likely. So why have them pay for this? Offers are more expensive than if you just do an installment agreement. They take a lot more time. They're a lot more work for us and the taxpayer. And so if they have this history of non-compliance, you have to at least advise them, hey, maybe you don't want to do an offer, because, if we get you an offer and you're not compliant in the years ahead for at least the next 5 years, you've wasted all your money. Now you got to come back and hire me again for another resolution.
So if you settle, with an OIC, does it clear all the penalties and all the interest?
Yes. And the liens will go away as well. That's why people love offer, because it's a quicker resolution. If you get an installment agreement, it doesn't go away. There's no avenue that we can just call up the IRS and settle for this, the rest goes away. It doesn't work like that. What happens is, if you get set up on an installment agreement, you may pay a few $100s a month on an enormous tax debt. Eventually, it's going to go away, but you have to wait till the collection statute expires. And the collection statute normally expires 10 years from the date the tax is assessed. However, there's so many things that can stop the running of the statute on collections that for each year, our firm has to go in and calculate what's the last date the IRS can collect. And sometimes the IRS has wrong collection statute expiration dates. We have a case now, and they've gone back and forth. First they would concede, then they wouldn't. We're talking over $200,000 in tax debt that we claim the collection statute has expired on. Now they're saying, no, it hasn't. So it's up in appeals. But hopefully we're going to win, because we think for sure that the collection statute has already expired and they can no longer collect on our client.
So what are the risks of submitting an offer that's maybe too aggressive or even poorly documented?
Well, you're not going to get it accepted. And you don't want to do that. And there are practitioners out there that submit offers in compromise that should never have been submitted, because people have asked me to review it. They don't list all the assets, and then they'll offer them $1. Well, their retirement alone throws them out, and the IRS has all that information. And basically, you're perjuring yourself then on the farm. Here's the other danger, too. Let's say the clock on collections runs out in 18 months and you owe an enormous amount of money. Well, you file the offer in compromise during the time that the offer is being considered, the clock stops. So when you come out of the offer, if it's rejected, they still got a year and a half to collect. So you wouldn't want to file an offer in those situations.
Wow. So Lance, what would you tell clients who ask if they're really going to get that pennies on the dollar deal? Like, what would you tell them if they really feel like that's going to be something they're going to get?
Well, I would tell them that we don't know the answer to that before we go into a full-blown financial analysis. That takes several hours. But in the initial consult, we normally always ask about the value of their home when we talk, because that's not something that takes a lot of time. And the equity in their home alone can knock them out of an offer. So we generally ask those questions, or what other assets they have. So this couple we talked to this morning, guess what? They're not going to qualify for the offer because their home's worth $1.2 million. But of this $300,000 or so debt, $180,000 expires in 2028. So, there's different ways, and they probably don't have a whole lot of income. They may pay a small chunk of that, but even if we get them set up on an agreement, the likelihood of them coming anywhere close to paying $180,000 in 3 years is pretty low.
Wow. Do you feel that when you're involved in something like this, offering compromised, a lot of tax debt, installment agreements, different things like that, do you feel once you kind of get put on the IRS radar, do you feel like you're always like top of mind as a client, top of mind after they kind of get involved in this, or is it still the IRS? It's kind of random, or do they lock in on people that have more issues after they submit forms and things like that?
Here's where you put your client on the radar, and we never do this. Unless there's already a deadline in place, we're not going to call the IRS till we're ready to make a deal. Because, and I know this because people come to me after they've gone to another practitioner. The practitioner says, hey, let's call the IRS. They're trying to impress them about how they can handle this right away. Well, guess what? That puts them on the radar, and they'll say, oh, you got 20 days to get us a financial statement. And if they hadn't called, I just had a guy, $40,000 in less than a year would have gone away. Well, now he's on their radar. So guess what? They're going to levy him and start the levy process if he doesn't send in that within 20 days. So we never want to call the IRS because we have special software that goes into their systems. It goes all the way back to 1990. We can get a lot more information than we ever could if we called them up, and we can get all that done and get all this information, and it doesn't put our clients on their radar.
Wow. Lance Drury, sir, thank you so much for joining me again. Thank you for all this good information.
Well, thank you, Evan. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Pleasure's all mine. Now, everyone at home, if you're thinking about submitting an offer in compromise, do it with the right legal help. Visit lancedrurylaw.com for a strategy that protects your interests. Thank you all for joining us.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.